for the invitation, and you're all going to be witness to a new talk because I have another book which I finished, and I was trying to do 2 in 1. I don't know whether this is such a great idea, but you'll get 2 for 1. So on the holiday season, that's always a great deal. And I will talk about computational participation, and I'll explain in a moment what this means, but I want to also look at programming, computing in the context of gaming, because I think these 2 areas right now are very hot topics, not just in academia, but also in education. If you look at computation, something like computational thinking is making the round, and in gaming, I mean, games have become mainstream media. 20 years ago when I did this, video games were evil. They were not supposed to be in schools, but now a generation of kids has grown up and they've turned out okay, and it turns out everybody is gaming. It's big business, even more so now than the movie industry. But what I want to talk about on how these 2 aspects, computing and participation, 2 directions which we usually don't look at together, because in terms of computing, we think very much about thinking, computational thinking. And if anybody has missed it, the Hour of Code Computer Science Education Week is going on. This is actually from last year. I think the numbers right now are about 160 million kids, not just in the US, but across the nation, participating in Hour of Code. So definitely computing is a time which has come right now. And who has seen the Hour of Code video? Oh, not enough, so you'll be, there's different version. You only get the 60-second version right now. So to understand.
There will be 1.4 million jobs by 2020 in the computing-related fields. Less than 29% of them are going to be filled by Americans, and less than 3% of that 29% are going to be women.
I don't code movie. Sorry, this is girls coding, which is equally important, but let's check. I guess we're not going.
Here we are, 2013. We all depend on technology to communicate, to bank, and none of us know how to read and write code.
The first program I wrote asked things like, what's your favorite color? Or how old are you?
I wrote a program to play tic-tac-toe.
I first learned how to make a green circle and a red square appear on the screen.
You're just trying to make something, trying to transfer something from your mind to the computer or to a tablet. It's an experience.
The whole limit in the system is just that there just aren't enough people who are trained and have these skills today.
The programmers of tomorrow are the wizards of the future. You're going to look like you have magic powers compared to everybody else.
Great coders are today's rock stars. That's it.
So this little piece came out in February 2013, not so long ago, and it actually went viral. Within 3 weeks, millions of people had watched and downloaded the video, which was kind of surprising because for many years, actually I would say for the last 20 years, schools and programming have really, especially in K-12, have really not gone together. And in the longer video, I guess my computer does not like. There is a quote from the late Steve Jobs, which actually starts out the 5 or 10 minute version. You just saw the teaser. And you know, he's equally a proponent of everybody learning how to program because it teaches you how to think. And I think that's in general, when we think about computational thinking, how people think about programming as a thinking activity. And that's definitely true. We had commissions around that who try to define what computational thinking is, and I can tell you right away we have no agreement in the community, neither in computer science nor in education. But it has become this kind of umbrella term, this rallying cry to bring computing back into K-12. And I'm all for it, but what I hope to do today is to show, yes, computational thinking is great, but it kind of puts the emphasis too much on the individual and the mind. It doesn't look at computing as a social activity. When I ask you, I'm sure you all have mobile phones. I mean, you are on social media, many of you are on social media. So nowadays we're experiencing computing actually very much through a social lens, and in particular kids probably more so than we have grown up. So that's why one of my pitches is to think about, yes, computational thinking, but let's kind of look at it through a participation lens, through a social activity. And what better context is there than games? Because games are not the lone person sitting in front of a screen. We all know that massive gaming communities, World of Warcraft exists with 12 million people. And to some of you, it might be a surprise that many tween communities like Habbo Hotel by the Suleika Corporation is actually much bigger with over 200 million registered users. Yes, you wonder what do 10 to 12-year-olds all spend their time on. And two of the most popular activities in the hour of code, this is from Tuesday, so it's probably outdated, are guns and games. But it just kind of also showcases some of the popularity. And gaming, more so than computing, had their coming out, if you want, 10 years ago. Jim G's book, What Video Games Can Teach Us About Learning and Literacy in 2003 was probably, I mean, kind of the opening call to consider gaming not just for fun, but as a serious context for learning. Because in the book he makes a case, the games are really great learning environments. People spend inordinate amount of time on them. Especially kids, much more so than they spend on their homework. They solve complex problems and they don't give up. I mean, all of these things which we are seeing from the motivational perspective are really important for learning. And they do this often together, sometimes even in large teams. And so he didn't actually argue that now we should design a lot of educational games, which is lo and behold what has kind of happened. I mean, games that teach. He just made the case, look at those features, what they tell us about learning, on how to design good learning and teaching environments. Maybe we can learn something from designers. So since in the last 10 years, I mean, you have books, and the serious gaming industry definitely has kind of grown, not just in K-12, but also in health and in training. Gamification is a big approach. And there are also now the first reviews coming out looking at the effectiveness of those serious games, and it probably shouldn't come to a surprise. People don't agree. Academics never agree. But some people find it very effective. Other ones agree that it really, the vote is still out. But lo and behold, we have now enough evidence that gaming can be used for educational purposes, but there's a problem with that. All of these studies which have looked at, I don't know how many games, hundreds of studies, thousands of students involved, they only looked at playing games for learning. They never looked at making games for learning. Even, I mean, there's a popular book by the USA Today writer Greg Topol who came out a few months ago. And you know, when the mainstream media picks up on something, it definitely has kind of moved out of the ivory tower. So when we look at making games for learning, I think the best case scenario we have right now is the advent of Minecraft, which many of you might know. If you have children, there probably are there. Was started by a Swedish programmer, really kind of an indie sandbox game, and then purchased last year for lots of money by Microsoft, and probably these guys know something we don't know. But it's a growing community, and what is really interesting about Minecraft, these boundaries between playing and making games have kind of become more porous. Actually, Minecraft allows you to do both, and I think in gaming, we really need to look at both playing and making games. We have focused too much on the playing side, maybe from an educator's perspective. That's our first inclination to design something. But Minecraft shows you that these two modes of learning can actually exist very nicely right next within one environment. So today I want to talk about these two aspects of computational participation, on how we can move from just thinking to think about it as participation, but then also to look not just as broadening, but also deepening participation, because we're not just interested in reaching 160 million kids like Hour of Code does right now. I think as educators, we have a real interest in kind of deepen kids' understanding about systems, principles, if you want beyond the fun into the hard fun. And I think this is actually the agenda for K-12 education right now, to figure out what to do with computational thinking or participation, and how to broaden access and participation, because both computation and gaming are two areas which are heavily, have a lack of diversity of women and minorities, something which has been prominent for the last 20 years. And it is only recently that Silicon Valley and others have kind of woken up to the realization. And I believe that schools are actually the one place where we can make a difference in addressing this lack of diversity. And I will actually show you why it won't just happen on its own if you just put the stuff out there. So let me start around computational participation by actually looking, what evidence do we have that making games for learning works? And so I'll talk about a synthesis, some outcomes and challenges on how we look at this. So making games for learning, as Peter pointed out many, many years ago, I was at MIT, and Nintendo gave money to MIT, $1 million, which was a lot of money then, and it probably bought them more publicity than they ever could pay for. It was $1 million. And everybody thought we would actually design the perfect learning game. But we didn't do this. We had an experimental school at this time called Project Headlight, which was located in then one of the worst neighborhoods, Jamaica Plain in Boston, right next to the projects. It has significantly changed in the last 20 years. But at Project Headlight, we brought in hundreds of computers. It was an elementary school, and some of you are old enough to remember that 25 years ago, the idea of, little kids' fingers touching, keyboards and working with computers was something people didn't believe in. They thought computers were for the workplace, for adults. They were expensive. But Seymour Papert at the time had the idea, if we really wanted to study the effect of computing and technology, we needed to provide more than 1 hour of access per week, which most of the schools could offer, who offered a computer lab like the one you see here in the back, where kids would go 45 minutes, it was the locked room because it was expensive equipment, and then they would do some programming in Logo or Basic. So if the holiday season came around, they programmed the Christmas tree. If Easter came, it was the Easter bunny hopping across the field. Then after the 45 minutes, they would move back to their classroom and do completely regular classroom. There was no connection between what was happening in the computer lab with the rest of the curriculum. So the school was a model, a fairly bold one, which IBM, as you can see, also supported with a donation. They were then producing hardware, hard to believe for some people. And these were, by the way, 256K machines. If you pull out your mobile phones, you have way more powerful computers right now carrying in your pocket. And they were all networked, which was also very unique. And the students in the school were actually every day at least 1 or 2 hours on this computers. There were about 200 students, grades 1 to 6. And what we were doing, we're coming up with new ways to integrating programming with subject matter across the curriculum. The idea was to give extended time frames, so not just to spend more than 45 minutes, to connect it to a subject like science, math, art, reading, writing, and to also create an authentic product. So not just to learn coding for the sake of writing some lines of code or making a Christmas tree, but to actually make electronic artifacts like games. Those were the days of Nintendo, Super Mario Brothers, Sonic the Hedgehog, actually were interested in designing on their own. And I want to show you a few glimpses of what this looks like, the games which kids design.
It's demo time for parents at the Hennigan School in Boston. He will ask you a fraction problem. If you get it wrong, you will become mentally deformed.
I don't know what's wrong with it.
After months of work, the 5th grade students are showing off the computer games they created. Even the principal is here to take a try. The children are using the programming language Logo, invented by this man, Seymour Papert. As part of a bold MIT Media Lab experiment known as Project Headlight, Papert, his research team, and the Hennigan teachers are developing methods to put inner-city children in charge of their own learning. Instead of using purchased software like most schools, Project Headlight challenges the students to use Logo to create their own software.
How did you decide what to put in your messages when you get it right? Well, they're basically all the same. I don't know. I just thought it'd be encouraging when they're right. What do you say when they're wrong? That's wrong, try it again.
In the design process, they become expert programmers. They draw, manipulate shapes, even guide a skier down the slope. And like all the students, this one is built in a surprise. When the skier hits a bald spot, a fraction quiz. No run-of-the-mill video games. These are designed to teach mathematics. Abigail has chosen to design her fraction game around the Greek myths.
We want to go to the home of Zeus, but the map was ripped up by the Greek god Hades. All the Greek gods and goddesses have a fraction in the map. You're to go to the gods and goddesses one at a time.
Her toughest challenge involves allowing the user to choose an answer from the quiz. She's had to learn the hows and whys of the ifs and thens.
The hardest thing about this is making the program for what's your answers to the fraction problem. Like, if you push A, then you do this, and then if you push B, then this happens, and C, then this other thing happens. So it's really hard.
The fact that a 9-year-old is learning such sophisticated programming concepts is a testament to Project Headlight's success. And for Abigail, the command of the computer allows her to devote her attention to what she really enjoys. Designing a Nintendo-style interface and creating a compelling story around the gods. Ginny has designed her fraction game around a spider web. Like her classmates, she's learned advanced programming. She's also learned the advantage of producing her own game.
Because you make your own game and you can play it anytime you want, but in Nintendo, this right here, you don't have to buy it because you're the one who's making it.
With Nintendo as a model, she's even designed her own game box.
Like, at first I didn't know how to design US, and so the art teacher helped me and I designed it.
In fact, as part of the project, all of the children package their games and promote them with an ad campaign. These integral activities make this project unlike any textbook exercise. The students here are designing a real product from start to finish. And through the process, they learn about every advertising medium. They even produce TV commercials.
If you play this game, play it good, you may grow up to be like Ronald Reagan. Town is awesome. It's spooky, it's scary, and it's exciting. And it's by GCA. Awesome.
Despite his TV commercial, it's a
So I think you get a flavor of the products were, this was a 3 months long curriculum which actually extended into 6 months because the kids didn't want to stop. Then I said I have to write my dissertation, we have to stop now, but you can continue. And it's actually still one of the few studies which had a quasi-experimental setup because we had control and comparison groups to not just look at, it was part of the math curriculum, as you could guess, students were learning about rational numbers, topic of many 4th grade classes. And we looked not only at the fractions of learning them in such a context, but also at the programming to a group of students in the same headlight program who had as much access to computers but didn't do the integration. And then in the same school, there was another wing which just had the 45-minute programming once a week. And what you could see, that on both fronts, both in the mathematics as well as the programming learning, these students outperformed significantly all groups, whether it was in terms of debugging programs or generating programs. And I say that because we're talking a lot when we bring new innovations into school about evidence. And in programming, we have very few studies which kind of meet this standard. So for 25 years, this has been pretty much it. So what you saw here was kind of a combination of integrating content design with software design and then instructional design. And many of you might know the adage, if you want to learn something, you teach a class. Sometimes we in academia do this. And it actually works really well from the principle of learning by explaining and representing. And these games were designed for the 3rd graders in the school who came twice to give feedback. But I think in terms of learning dimensions, we have a personal dimension because applications were here created, and you saw that all the students created fraction games, but that these games looked very different because they resonated with particular aspects. You had a social component. I'm very much in favor of these circle arrangements, and I'm now looking at this lab over there with those rows of computers. This obviously also creates some architectural setup, which was the open school design, which nobody in the 60s, 70s knew how to use effectively. And then this kind of cultural aspect of reworking and remixing games, which kind of became the foundation for this design. And nowadays, obviously, the games you can see in Tinker, Scratch look very different. There are many more tools. People don't type code anymore. We actually developed Scratch as a visual block programming language because we wanted that kids avoided the syntax mistake, which many beginning programmers make and are hard to debug. And there are also many programming communities where kids, by the way, game making is one of the most popular activities in the Scratch community, which has over millions of registered members, and I can't remember, I think close to 10 million projects right now. So if we look over the evidence from the last 20 years of all the studies, starting with the first game design project, what do we actually find? So what I did, I just did a search, and then I extracted, there's many more studies, but I focused on particularly empirical studies because I was not interested about making a case for making games for learning. But what evidence do we have? What kids actually do learn? And I want to just give you, so interestingly enough, most of the projects actually happen to be with girls and boys together, which is interesting because gaming is such a heavily male domain, even though nowadays many women are actually the more active gamer group. This has changed significantly. And then there were a few projects which are targeted specifically at girls. If you look at the school context, we find about a little bit more than half in school and the other part being mostly in the club. And I think this reflects, that programming isn't part of the standard curriculum, neither here nor in Europe, where a lot of these studies came from. so that a lot of them kind of move into the after-school choice activities for students. There's actually only one study which we found which compared directly in the same setup, playing versus making, and found that it was a study which was done in a more experimental setting. People were only making or playing their games for 2 or 3 hours and not more extended time frames. And they actually found that constructing kind of engages students more in higher order learning skills and shows more motivation when compared to a similar version. It was about designing vocabulary games. So when we look at the content of what's being learned, it was kind of difficult. People come up with all their own names. In programming, we don't have an agreed standards yet. I mean, many states don't even have standards for programming education. So people make up their own things. And what I decided to do is pick a framework from Karen Brennan and Michel Resnick, which is actually informed by computational thinking. It looks at particular concepts, loops, conditionals, and practices, debugging, reiterating, things you do in programming, then kind of perspectives. And I looked at content, academic content. Was it math? Was it science? Was it social science? And cognition was kind of the problem-solving skills, meta-learning, which we often have. And here is what you can see in terms of focus. So the close, to 1/3 of the studies focus on coding. Many of them, by the way, had multiple purposes. Which is not surprising because it was often used as a way to introduce programming. But then there was also a good part which looked at content learning in academic disciplines, as well as kind of meta-learning. And very few actually had a focus on collaboration. Probably because most of them were not done online, but in classrooms. So lo and behold, the synthesis kind of shows us we actually have, like the serious gaming people who study playing games for learning, a significant body of research which looks at making games for learning and finds that there is evidence of learning of different subject matters. We have, some challenges, as there always is. What kind of games are designed? What do we call a game? How computation is defined? When computer scientists do data collection, it's not pretty. They have very little idea about social science research. So, well, there's also, a lack of negative findings, which might reflect journal publication policies, so people don't report back. What I found kind of not troubling but interesting, very few instances of collaborative learning in these contexts, as well as an absence of online learning, which might again also reflect that many schools are hesitant to put their children online and prefer to have them more on standalone machines. So computational participation, if you want to pick up on the definition, uses the same terms which Jeanette Wing, who was the one who popularized the term, and others have kind of introduced it, and she talked about problem solving, designing systems, which fits perfectly with games because you design a whole system and you understand human behavior. And games are designed for other players, and it's usually a very big revelation for young designers when somebody else comes and plays their games and doesn't understand the instructions, anything. But I think what we want to see, it's not just about the problem solving and the system design, it's also a social activity because games are played by others, even the games which are made. And we need to consequently kind of include the collaborative aspect. For those of you who are interested, Jeffrey Erb just published a systematic review. He found 450 papers. I don't know what he all found, but you can look this up online. And our paper will come out in a month or so, and the educational psychologist will give you a much more in-depth view on the findings of the synthesis, which I just kind of gave you some samplings from what we found. So gaming, making games for learning, definitely engages students in many aspects of computational thinking. It makes them part, if you want, of the larger community where people produce things. So in looking at kind of the participation aspect and how we can broaden and deepening this, I have a few suggestions looking both at playing and making and connecting, because I think these are the challenges we face if we want to take these studies which took place over the last 20 years, long before Hour of Code happened, but now that we bring computing back into the classroom. And I think my first point is actually understanding participation in these communities. Because I was part of the Scratch development team, Mitchell and I with Yochai Benkler from Harvard had a 5-year grant to actually study computation and collaboration, so we had access to the back-end data, which most of you don't. And by the way, most online companies never reveal the data. So what we did, this is actually a graph, and again, this is not even accurate because the graph probably now jumps off the page. In May 2007, we released Scratch, and you can see the projects, comments, and remixes, and you can see this is when Hour of Code happened. I mean, the nearly exponential growth in the community, and it's keeping on growing. So we were asking question, who is actually participating? What does development over time look like? We have a lot of great case study by Karen Brennan and others where we have studied individual kids and communities in Scratch to see what they're programming, what they're doing. But I think when you have a community with more than 1 million members, that's not necessarily representative. That's kind of cherry picking. So what we did, we sampled 5,000 random users who logged in January. So we just randomly picked them, whoever that was, and then we looked at what they were doing. And this was, by the way, the old version of Scratch, which was not aligned, so not everything is captured. And so one interesting finding here is that about half of them, actually they log in, but they leave no traces. So we actually don't know what they're doing. They might be kind of going around. But 45% post projects. This is a very high level of participation. If any of you study online communities, in most cases, 5 to 10% of the users are very active. The rest are kind of bystanders or kind of coming occasionally. So that actually speaks for a very high level. And then we clustered the users more in kind of what in terms of commenting on how they engaged on the community, and we kind of just grouped them into 5. High network are the kids who do everything. They post, they comment, they remix. Some people are just social, other people just download and don't do anything. And we looked how over time their participation changed. So the same people, what was their likelihood in the coming months to be in the same group or change into, if you want, a more active group. And what we found there is that lo and behold, the people who are in the high group in January also end up there in March. And for all other ones, the likelihood of ever kind of moving in more advanced or deeper forms of participation is very slim. So what we have here, we have a community which, when you go onto the first page, looks very broad. But in the end, we have a similar pattern we find in many online communities. A small percentage, 5 to 10%, drives literally 90% of the activity online. The rest of the people are tangential. Then we looked at the programming. So if you look on who logged on in January, it's not surprising that 56% of them are kind of beginners. So they have we can do this by the Scratch account. Obviously, some people could have prior programming experience. We don't know that. And then 50 and 80. So this actually reflects kind of our finding from the latent class analysis. We looked at the kind of code and the projects they posted. And what you see here and this is just for January, it's practically the same for all the months, that the 58%, they all do loops. Loops are a fairly easy concept to understand, but variables in some of these are fairly low. And the kids who are on the top, remember our high networkers, the people, they engage in everything in their projects. So what you have here, once you achieve the status of a high networker, then you're very likely to continue and reap the benefits of an online community. But for those kids, the chances of ever moving up are actually fairly slim. And I don't have, I won't show you with all the chi-squares and further analysis. You can read this up in papers. There's also a strong gender difference. The girls tend to have less sophisticated programs than the boys online, judging by this data. So, I'm not doing this to kind of bash Scratch. I'm doing this to kind of illustrate, because a lot of people argue with Hour of Code, oh, we got the kids interested, now they can go online and learn coding. And I'm telling you, it's not going to happen, because we studied Scratch. We know how hard and how resistant kids are to join, and also how difficult it is to get into the strata of programming where you would reap the benefits and would be able to learn on your own. So I think these hopes with the kind of proliferation of online communities and activities are great, but they're a little bit misguided. So I think what we need to do beyond just understanding and deepening participation to really make it accessible to all, we also need to kind of broaden participation in terms of what kind of games are designed. This is a very typical code hero, and you already know who is going to work with this one. So I'm suggesting, in terms of programming, we can make games and activities around a variety of different things, not just what commercial media suggest, but also open up to other areas. Gaming actually has a very lively indie scene with very interesting social issues, historical topics, which are very rarely ever targeted in the big games which are out there, which many kids play. One example is, for example, to actually move games out into the physical world. Nowadays, gaming, people buy the Wii, the Kinect, it's already out there in the commercial place, but we think about gaming very much as a screen design activity. So examples are here, for instance, to make wearable game designers with the Makey. To remix, these were all game designers we did for a Flappy Bird game, which kids took from scratch, remixed, and then kind of customized to their own purposes. So you can kind of introduce different materials, which I think are very appropriate also for the elementary school level. And I think, lo and behold, we really need to look at playing and making as kind of coming together rather than being apart, as it's kind of happened right now with the serious gaming community, where it's just about, I think for the game designers, it's a really interesting job to design a great instructional game. They learn a lot in the process about the subject matter in game design, but to really think more along the lines of Minecraft, where we kind of integrate the playing and making, the creative and play mode in one activity to foster what I call computational participation. So we have both the participation part as well as the computing part. And if I ever have time, in a few months we'll publish a project guide which illustrates on how you can make augmented board games. Yes, you can buy electronic Monopoly, augmented with cash registers. Many games now come with electronic digital augmentations. You can make the variable game designers, you can make touchpads. There's a whole rich world out there, which actually also nicely connects into engineering aspects, because you work not just with the computing part, you also design electronic circuits. One area which I will not talk more extensively here is also to think about computing moving into the wearable domains. And with the advent of the Apple Watch, wearables now have become also a very attractive professional product. And what you have here is the LilyPad Arduino. It's a modification of the open source Arduino customized to and you stitch circuits with conductive threads. So who would have thought that sewing and computing could actually go together? And then here you have different sensors. You have light, sound sensors. You have also different actuators like LEDs. I heard that one of the Hollywood actresses recently wore a dress illuminated with LEDs. You use a battery, and then you can essentially write the program on your computer, download it via the USB drive to the Arduino, and run it independently on your wearable. And so it's a really interesting, again, kind of showcasing what's kind of behind all the technology you're using. I see you're using your iPhone right now, and you have an idea on how the pressure button works for activating your thing. And so you actually learn how to design some of the fundamentals, which are now mostly hidden in the technology we buy. And I think that's fine for the everyday functional use. We don't want to design or make things. But from an educational perspective, I think we want to understand on how the technology is designed that, now captures every aspect of our life. And I think there's a whole another interesting discussion around gender in computing with textiles, which some of you may know. Lady Ada Lovelace was actually, often called the first programmer, and the program she wrote was to kind of for jumping machines, which made the fashionable textiles of her time. So the reason why I say deepening participation is because when we look at the choice activities, which you saw from the analysis of the Scratch community, we know that kids can go there. Scratch happens to be also free, so paid by your tax dollars at work, so you can come. You just have to figure out how to join. We know from case studies that kids often don't feel comfortable joining communities they don't know. So it looks so easy just to go, but you don't really know what to do there if you're a newcomer. And even if you participate, the girls actually now have reached nearly 40% at Scratch, so the numbers are changing, they're a moving target. But if you look at the coding and the high levels of engagement, we know from our analysis, and I'm pretty sure if we were given access to other data to look more on what's kind of going on, we would find very similar numbers. And I think by design is when it happens in school, when it becomes part of the curriculum. So South Korea just decided in 18 months all elementary and middle school students will have computing in their classroom. It's a very top-down approach. The president is an engineer. She just decided it, and then everybody kind of rallies on. I was there last month. Very interesting decision-making process, different from here. But showcasing how, you can really create a foundation. The UK, if some of you know, last year introduced K-12 wide curriculum coding requirement for all students in their schools. Very interesting on how they have kind of designed a system with master coaches to do it. So we do know many other countries have it actually already part of their curriculum. So we do know if we go by design and not by choice, we at least have the opportunity to reach larger numbers. It doesn't guarantee that everybody will love computing. It doesn't guarantee that everybody will be successful. But I think it will guarantee that everybody can make at least an informed choice about whether they want to learn more and understand. And I think about it actually, there is to talk about making it the fifth art. I always include art, so it becomes, that was said before. There's a big debate on whether computer science should be taught in computer school. I think the polls are fairly clear, And if you look at the Hour of Code and how it's been received, I mean, they have events at the White House, the message is really clear, it's happening. But when we think about illiteracy, we need to make sure that everybody participates. And there are actually states, even this year, when you look at the 2015 AP CS data, admittedly this is a very kind of narrow perspective on how to judge success, where the number of women and minorities has not increased over the last 2 years in spite of all of code.org. The numbers of people who are already interested in computing and have taken the exam has increased. So we still face the diversity issue. And so a lot of talk about coding as a literacy is about college and career because this plays well in Washington. But I think we equally need to pay attention to what I call the other two C's, civics and creativity, which are often kind of left out of these kind of conversations, maybe because they're harder to grasp. But on the other hand, I always ask people in the industry, do you know 10 years from now what programming language will be used? Do you know what the technology will be? They don't know that either. They don't have a crystal ball either. So the college and career readiness, I think, is, in my impression, actually the weaker argument for introducing a basic literacy. For me, it's really about general literacy. And I'm picking something here which Sylvia Scribner, who's a long-time literacy scholar, wrote many, many years ago about the 3 metaphors of literacy. And she said, when we talk about literacy, we often talk about the functional level of what you need to be able to, knowing how to read and write and to count, the 3 R's. And there are a lot of discussion on what that means. But we forget that there are 2 other ones, the political level, the reason on why we make people literate. In order to become competent citizen and participate in decision making. And this doesn't mean that everybody has to become a computer scientist or engineer or a game designer. It means that you understand how the technology functions, what privacy issues are, how search algorithms function, because they impact your personal and your professional life every day of the week. And I think the personal level is equally important because so much social interactions are now mediated by technology. You know, we may not write long love letters anymore like maybe Ada Lovelace did 200 years ago, but we compose, a 140-character tweet. We learn how to do that. And so I think we need to look at, if you think about coding as a literacy, we need to look at all 3 aspects, not just as the first one, because then it has a place in the K-12 curriculum. And here is my point, because I think we need to have a voice in the digital public. We have a regular public in urban planning, the cities. And since people became more involved, I think cities have become more livable. And likewise, the digital public, in which all of our children are going to grow up, in which we participate, we need to have a voice to make that a livable space for everyone as well. Thank you very much.